This video aims to provide players old and new with a fresh perspective when it comes to deck building and card selection. Let's try to narrow down what makes great decks great so we can take the best features of the best decks and apply them to those that we want to play. This should shorten the learning curve prior to diving into in-depth discussions of specific decks and allow new players to take on the challenge of learning the game with an overview of what good decks are really capable of. I do not claim to be an expert at the game or any facet of the game such as deck building or competitive gameplay. Everything in this discussion is purely my opinion, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's begin by understanding what YuGiOh Duel Links is. Duel Links is a gacha collectible card game, which means that in-game resources are critical whether you are a paying player or a free-to-play player. The flexibility of acquiring specific singular cards like the real YuGiOh TCG is not available in this game, at least for most cards used in competitive decks. Keep this in mind to prevent playing fast and loose with your in-game resources. You're better served in the long run by knowing what you really want and how to get there without using up too much of your resources. This also prevents the need to reroll or restart your game. Keeping the same account for a long period of time will help accumulate potential good in-game resources like event-limited characters and cards. Now let's move on to my thoughts on card selection and deck building. As with most video games, Duel Links is dominated by what we call a metagame. For those unfamiliar, meta stands for the most effective tactic available. This is determined by results from large tournaments or an in-game recurring event named the KC Cup. The quantified data from these events gives us a list of which decks are the best, or at the very least the most played decks and cards in the game. These lists are comprised of specific deck types which vary in playstyle and are identified by card names that cover the kind of cards that go into each deck. The most played cards that do not belong to a specific deck type are called staples, or cards that synergize well with any deck and are much needed support options for any deck worth its salt. After watching tons of replays in tournament games, and my own gameplay experience, I learned that differentiating good playable decks from the rest of the crap out there begins with learning from the meta. Learning from the meta is not limited to playing cards that are considered meta, but rather learning what makes these meta cards consistent and applying what you learn to what you want to play. This will help you manage your resources better, allowing you to have fun with the game longer. The best decks out there are simply the best because they are able to achieve or have the following. Number 1, achieving a definitive win condition. Number 2, consistency. And number 3, accessibility. A definitive win condition is a game state where you're able to emerge victorious by playing what your deck is built to do. This means that building your deck requires that you know what your endgame should be. Beat down the opponent's life points to 0, control the board and dominate with your field, eliminate the competition with effect damage, decide on your win condition and go from there. A deck that tries to do too much is a deck that's bound to lose. Having a specific goal for your deck will keep you sharp and help you learn how to survive in the competitive scene or in the in-game rankings, and will help you move forward with your deck building skills and overall game knowledge. Achieving a definitive win condition can only be done with a deck that is consistent. Any deck will eventually get a win, but only decks that are well thought out will be able to get wins consistently. Keep in mind that even the best decks break, and that is something you will have to live with. However, this does not mean that you should not try to build your deck to provide you with a consistent hand as often as possible. In my opinion, a consistent deck should be able to do most of, if not all of, the following. Draw cards outside of the draw phase, or search out specific cards. Special summon monsters. Use the graveyard as a resource. And interact with enemy decks. Deck thinning for the purpose of going into or extending your combos is something that all good decks aim to do. Waiting on your draw phase is a surefire way to get slaughtered, so make sure that you play your deck in a way that would allow you to get the pieces you need ASAP. It is important to note that in the current state of Duel Links, most draw power cards are tied to a specific archetype or deck type, which are referred to as engines. A deck's ability to special summon monsters is quite critical, due to the fact that you may potentially special summon monsters as much as you want during your turn. Remember that normal summons are only possible once per turn, making your normal summon quite a scarce resource each turn. Special summoning monsters is a great way to proceed with or extend your combos to be able to build a board that is ready to take out your opponent, or at least ready to respond to your opponent's attack coming from a first turn start. Most decks in the modern meta are capable of special summons, however what differentiates the best decks from the rest is their ability to special summon directly from the deck, or have monster cards that allow you to go into extra deck monsters. These types of special summons are arguably the best places to special summon from, given the fact that you may either thin your deck or get a monster with an impactful effect from the extra deck, or even both. The graveyard zone is a zone that is generally dedicated for cards that have already served their purpose. However, great decks and great duelists often treat this zone as a second hand. The ability to interact with your graveyard could open up the possibility of endless resources to use for your combos. Interacting with your opponent's board refers to a deck's ability to respond to or counter an opposing deck's combos, whether in the form of interrupting your opponent's plays or responding to ensure that you will make it to the next turn of the duel. This covers a deck's ability to replace monsters destroyed or removed by your opponent with monsters from the deck, graveyard, or extra deck, and the deck's ability to respond with spells or traps to counter or completely stop your opponent's play. A well-timed interaction could make or break the game, especially for meta decks. This is something to consider when building your deck, especially if you intend to use a deck that could allow you to surprise your opponent with obscure but effective cards within an archetype. Earlier in the video, I mentioned the key difference between the YuGiOh trading card game and YuGiOh Duel Links, which is the gacha nature of Duel Links. This makes in-game resources, specifically gems, critical to both paying and free-to-play players. This is obviously less impactful if you are willing to shell out. However, considering a deck's accessibility in terms of building a deck could save you money or in-game resources considerably. Accessibility in this sense refers to how much resources you will be spending to build a specific deck and how much of a return you are getting for the said investment, whether the investment is time, money, or both. You wouldn't want to be spending your resources just to cheese out a win every 3 ranked duels, or worse, use a deck you invested in during events or in a PvE setting and still end up with inconsistent results. Committing to a specific deck type is different due to each duelist's perspective and resources. However, much like a real-life investment, it would be a good idea to consider how the end justifies the means. Always check to see how much gems or cash you would need to spend in a worst-case, bad pack pull scenario when digging for cards. There are a lot of online resources that provide a list of boxes needed to build a deck and how much you would potentially be spending. That's all for today. I hope I gave you a takeaway worth considering from the discussion. If you enjoy discussions like this, let me know by hitting the like button and leaving comments and suggestions below. If you're a new player who has questions that this discussion has not covered, or if you have any questions in general, leave them in the comments. I made this channel to help out fellow duelists and I intend to do just that. This is the 10 Zone Duelist signing off for now.